My sister-in-law had been sleeping with my brother for 8 months before I caught them. And when I finally walked in on it, my own mother's first words weren't, "I'm sorry." They were, "Don't make this harder than it has to be." This is the story of how I lost a fiancé, a brother and a family in the same year, and how cutting every single one of them off was the best decision I ever made. Buckle up, because it gets ugly. My name's Marcus. No wait, scratch that, I can't use that. Let me start over properly. I'm Caleb, 31 years old, structural engineer in Calgary. And for most of my life I thought my family was the kind you could count on. Solid Alberta stock, my dad used to say. Like we were cattle bred for reliability. Turns out the only thing reliable about my family was how fast they'd throw me under the bus to keep the peace. My younger brother Dean was 18 months behind me. And we were the classic study in contrasts. He had this easy charm that made teachers forgive his missed assignments, and made girls forgive. Pretty much, I was the one who showed up. Permission slips. Signed on time, hockey practice attended without complaint, the kid who didn't need reminding twice. You'd think that would count for something in a house, but it didn't, not in any way that mattered. Growing up in Red Deer, my parents, Linda and Gordon, ran things in a particular way. Dad worked the oil patch most of his career, came home tired and conflict-averse. The kind of man who'd rather agree with whatever kept dinner peaceful than actually weigh in on anything. Mom was the real architect of the household. Soft-spoken in public and absolutely unmovable in private. The kind of woman who could make you feel like the unreasonable one even when you were standing there holding the receipts. Dean got away with things I never could. When he totaled his truck at 17 it was, "Thank God he's okay, kids make mistakes." When I got a B+ on a calculus final, my mother asked what happened. When Dean dropped out of his engineering program, after 2 years to find himself doing seasonal work at a ski resort in Banff, my parents drove out to visit him twice that winter. When I finished my own engineering degree with distinction, they sent a card, an actual card, in the mail, like I was a coworker they barely knew. Our younger sister Hazel rounded out the family, the baby everyone fussed over, perpetually positioned as the neutral party, who somehow never had to take a side on anything. Ever, not once in her entire life. I met Elaine during my last year at the University of Calgary. She was finishing a degree in kinesiology. And we ended up paired on a group project neither of us wanted to be in. Which is about as Canadian a meet-cute as it gets. She had this way of making a room feel warmer just by walking into it. All easy laughter and confidence. And I fell for her embarrassingly fast. Looking back, there were things I waved off. How she always needed to be the center of attention at parties. How she'd get this competitive edge around other women that she'd later explain away as just my personality. But I was 23 and certain I'd found my person, so I made excuses the way you do. She moved into my place in Bridgeland 2 years in, and we built this comfortable rhythm. I handled the mortgage paperwork and the RRSP contributions, and Met's property taxes got paid before the deadline. She handled making our life look good on Instagram. I told myself we balanced each other out. Really, I was just doing the work, while she did the curating. Dean met Elaine properly, at a Thanksgiving dinner, about a year into things, and I remember my mother pulling me into the kitchen afterward, to tell me how lucky I was, how striking Elaine was, how I'd really landed something special. Dean didn't say much that night. Just watched her across the table with an intensity I should have clocked for what it was. Over the following year he started turning up at our condo more than made sense. Needed a hand moving a couch. Wanted to talk through some career stuff. Just happened to be in the neighborhood, which, given that he lived 40 minutes away in Cochrane, was its own kind of tell. Elaine never seemed bothered by his visits. She'd laugh too long at his jokes, find reasons to touch his arm, give him a smile I used to think was reserved for me. I told myself I was being paranoid. He was my brother. She was my fiancée. Neither of them would do that to me. I proposed on a weekend up at Lake Louise. Nothing extravagant. Just the two of us, and a ring that had eaten most of a year's bonus. A princess cut, just over a carat, set in white gold. Close to $6,000 after tax. Because nothing in this country comes without the tax. She cried. Said yes. And we started planning a wedding for the following summer. The November after the engagement, I had a Friday at the firm and decided to surprise her. Picked up Vietnamese food from the place on 17th she loved. The one that did the pho exactly how she liked it. Grabbed her favorite spring rolls too. And drove home, thinking about nothing more complicated than what we'd watched that night. Her boots were by the door when I let myself in. Her Putzverbag was on the counter. The condo had that particular too quiet feeling, except for low voices coming from down the hall. My stomach dropped before my brain caught up to why. I told myself she was probably on a video call. I called out that I was home early. Nothing. The bedroom door was shut, which was strange, because she never closed it during the day. I walked toward it and the voices got clearer. Low, careful, the specific quiet of people trying very hard not to be heard. My hand was shaking when I opened that door, And then my whole life folded in on itself, in about half a second. Elaine and Dean. In our bed. She was wearing the cashmere sweater I'd bought her for her birthday. The burgundy one she said was the most thoughtful gift she'd ever gotten. Cost me almost $200 at a boutique on 4th Street. Apparently it really did make an impression. Just not the one I'd hoped for. They weren't even doing anything in that moment. They were just tangled together, her head on his chest, his arm around her. And somehow that stillness was worse than catching them mid-act would have been. This looked practiced. Comfortable. Like it had happened 100 times before. They froze. The silence in that room was the loudest thing I've ever experienced. My mind kept trying to construct an alternate explanation. Wrong condo, some kind of prank, anything other than what was directly in front of me. But there was no alternate explanation. This was my brother and my fiancée, in the apartment I covered the mortgage on, destroying everything I'd built without so much as a flinch of warning. Dean actually said, "It's not what it looks like." I almost laughed at the sheer audacity of that sentence given the visual evidence in the room. What else could it possibly look like? "Get out," I told him. My voice came out flat, almost bored, because shock does that. It numbs you before it lets the real feeling through. "Caleb, let me explain," said, not moving. "There's nothing to explain. Get out of my home." Elaine found her voice. "Caleb, please, just listen. No, you both made your choice. Now live with it." Dean gathered his clothes, still talking. Something about how it just happened. How he never meant for it to go this far. How he was sorry. Sorry. As if that's meant a single thing once you'd already detonated your own brother's life. I watched him dress in silence. Watched Elaine cry the kind of tears that used to make me want to fix things for her. Felt absolutely nothing. She tried once more after he left. "Caleb, we need to talk about this. We can work through." "There's no we. You have until tomorrow night to get your things out." "I hear Dean's place has an opening. You seemed comfortable enough there already." She flinched like I'd slapped her. "Good." I drove to my buddy Ruben's place that night without calling first. He took one look at my face and asked what happened. I told him. He went pale and asked if I was okay. I wasn't. The real weight of it didn't land until 3 in the morning, lying on his couch, staring at his ceiling fan, doing the math on how long it must have actually been going on. Weeks. Months. Had it started before the proposal? Had they laughed about me? Did anyone else already know? By the time I went back to the condo the next day, Elaine had already moved out and taken more than her own things. The espresso machine we'd gotten as a housewarming gift. The good throw blanket. Even the side table from her parents. That I'd always liked enough to consider mine by association. She left a note on the counter where our engagement photo used to sit. The photo itself conveniently gone. The note said she'd fallen for Dean and never meant to hurt me. That these things happen. That she hoped one day I could be happy for them. She actually asked for my blessing. My blessing, so the two people who'd gutted my life could move forward without a guilty conscience attached. My family found out within days. I never told them, so it must have come from Dean, getting ahead of the story before I could shape it myself. My mother called first, furious, saying she couldn't believe her own son would do this to me. That he wasn't welcome in her house anymore. It felt good for about 10 minutes. I already knew, somewhere underneath the relief, that it wouldn't last. My mother's loyalty has always had a return policy. My father, when I finally picked up his call 2 days later, just sighed and said, "Well, these things happen sometimes, eh?" That dismissal hurt more than my mother's hysterics. I told him there was no working through a man, sleeping with his brother's fiancée, in his brother's own bed. He told me not to be dramatic, that Dean was still my brother. Like shared blood was supposed to override everything else. Hazel called too, careful and noncommittal in that specific way she'd perfected over a lifetime of refusing to take sides. She said it was awful, just awful, and then mentioned, gently, that Dean was really struggling with guilt over it. As if his guilt deserved equal billing with my devastation. For weeks I let most of their calls go to voicemail. I buried myself in work instead, picking up every overtime shift the firm would give me, because the condo had gone from feeling like home to feeling like a crime scene. I happened to still be living in. My manager, a guy named Patrick, who'd always had a decent read on people, noticed the hours and asked if everything was all right. I gave him the sanitized version. Personal stuff, staying focused on work. And he mentioned, almost in passing, that the firm's Vancouver office was short a senior structural engineer and could use someone reliable to lead the team out there. Better pay, a real step up, and roughly 1,000 kilometers between me and everyone who just helped destroy my life. I told him I was interested, very interested. When I told my parents about the relocation, my father said it might be good for me, a fresh start. My mother acted like I'd announced. I was moving to another continent, crying about family dinners and Christmas, and how I couldn't just abandon them. I told her I wasn't abandoning them. I was leaving Dean behind, the person who'd actively chosen to wreck my life. "He's not part of this family anymore," she said. You don't need to run. I told her I'd known her for 31 years, and that she didn't do permanent consequences. That within a few months she'd be making excuses for him again. She swore she never would. The transfer came through faster than I expected. By early summer I'd given notice on the lease, sold off half my furniture, rather than haul around the memories attached to it, and Ruben helped me load a U-Haul. I didn't tell my family which day I was actually leaving, and I didn't leave a forwarding address. I just went. Vancouver was good to me, at first. New team, new building, nobody who knew the story. For a few months I could breathe. Then July came, and my mother called with that careful rehearsed tone she gets right before she says something I won't like. Dean and Elaine, she told me, were getting married. A small fall wedding, family only, and they wanted to reconcile with me beforehand so it wouldn't cloud the day. Cloud the day. As if my brother sleeping with my fiancée was comparable to bad weather. I told her no, not to reconciliation, not to a blessing, not to attendance. She cried, said I was tearing the family apart, said he'd lost me and that was punishment enough. I told her losing me wasn't a consequence he experienced. It was a consequence I was choosing to enforce, and there was a difference. She didn't have an answer for that, so she just kept repeating that he'd changed. That Elaine was good for him now. Over the following 2 weeks I heard from my father, from Hazel, even from an aunt I hadn't spoken to in years, all carrying some version of the same message. Forgive him. Come to the wedding. Stop being difficult. My father tried the practical angle. Holding a grudge doesn't hurt them, it hurts you. I told him I'd already moved on, gotten promoted, started over 1,300 kilometers away, and that this was what moving on actually looked like. In August an invitation showed up at my Vancouver address, which meant someone had gone looking for it. Since I certainly hadn't given it out, I threw it in the recycling without opening the envelope all the way. In September, the day of the wedding itself, my phone, which I'd left unblocked for work, lit up with messages from extended relatives, demanding to know where I was, telling me my mother was crying, telling me I was being disrespectful. I went to the gym, came home, made dinner and watched a movie. A perfectly ordinary Saturday. The fallout came the next morning, Hazel calling from a number I hadn't blocked yet. Launching straight into how humiliated my mother had been. How heartbroken Dean looked walking down the aisle without me there. I told her that sounded like a problem for all of them. And she said I was being cruel, that everyone was disappointed in me. I told her everyone could join Dean in the category of people I no longer spoke to. And hung up. For a few months after that, I actually had peace. Real peace. I made new friends, threw myself into a project downtown, started feeling something close to normal again. Then February happened. I was at a coffee shop near my office on Robson Street, when Hazel walked in and spotted me before I could leave. She'd changed her hair, lost some weight, and made a beeline for my table with the particular determination she gets when she's on a mission for someone else. How did you even find me? I asked, not inviting her to sit, though she sat anyway. Mom hired someone. She's been looking for months. That's not concern, Hazel. That's a private investigator. That's stalking. She pushed past it, said things had changed, that Dean and Elaine's marriage wasn't going well, that he'd finally realized what he'd thrown away. Money troubles, apparently. Elaine had quit her job to find herself, leaving Dean carrying the whole household on one income. And now he was stressed constantly. And supposedly desperate to make things right with me. And you're telling me this because, I said, you think his stress is supposed to move me? He knows what he did was unforgivable. He wants to really apologize, not just say sorries. And let me guess. Mom thinks if he apologizes, I forgive him, and everyone goes back to normal. Not normal. Better. The family's falling apart without you. Mom and Dad barely talk anymore. Good. They should be taking sides. Her eyes filled with tears. Right on schedule. You could fix this. You could bring everyone back together. I told her I didn't owe anyone healing. That fair would have meant my family supporting me when my life actually fell apart, not asking the person who got hurt to do the emotional labor of repairing the people who'd hurt him. I stood up, told her I didn't have a family anymore, just a collection of people who shared my DNA, and had chosen wrong every time it counted, and walked out while she was still talking. 2 weeks later my father showed up at my office. Patrick called me down with that careful, uncomfortable look people get when they're about to hand you a problem that isn't theirs. My father was in the lobby, refusing to leave. He looked older. Grayer. For one stupid second I felt something close to sympathy, and then I remembered how easily he'd shrugged off everything that had happened to me, and the feeling evaporated. We need to talk, he said. We really don't. How did you find me? Your mother hired someone. That's called stalking, Gordon. Look it up. He flinched at the first name. Good. He'd lost the right to the other one. He told me they wanted me home for Christmas, the whole family, Dean and Elaine included, so we could finally sit down like adults. I told him that was a hard pass, that I wasn't running from anything, I was just done. He said family doesn't give up on family. I told him family wouldn't have done what they did in the first place. What would it take, he finally asked, for you to come back? A time machine, I said. Short of that, nothing. I told him if anyone from that family showed up at my workplace again, I'd be filing a restraining order, and I went back upstairs without waiting to see his face fall. The real escalation came in March. I came home from a late site visit to find my parents and Hazel sitting on my front steps, and Dean and Elaine standing by their car in the driveway. The anger that hit me was cold, not hot. Get off my property. My mother stood up, doing her best wounded expression. We drove all this way, Caleb. Just give us 10 minutes. You drove here using information you got illegally. That's not dedication. That's stalking. Leave? Or I'm calling the police. Dean stepped forward and I put my hand up. Don't. You lost the right to my attention the day you decided sleeping with my fiancée was worth it. I'm sorry, he said anyway. I think about it every single day. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry it had consequences. If you were actually sorry, you wouldn't have married her. Elaine started crying predictably. I loved you. I just fell for him too. It wasn't planned. It absolutely was planned. You made a choice every single time you let it keep happening. That's not an accident. That's a pattern. My mother tried the angle she always tries. This is family, Caleb. The Christian thing, the decent thing, is to forgive. The decent thing would have been not sleeping with my fiancée. We're a bit past that conversation now. My father said the thing about grudges only hurting me, and something in me just went quiet and clear. You want me to let it go? Fine. I'm letting all of you go. Dean wrecked my life and you all welcomed him back like nothing happened. You're the ones who decided family meant forcing the person who got hurt to do all the forgiving. I pulled out my phone and started recording, told them clearly, on camera, that I would never forgive any of them, that I considered every one of them done, that if they came near my home or my work again I'd file for a restraining order and follow through on it. My mother sobbed. My father looked hollowed out. Hazel cried the way she always does, on cue. Dean and Elaine just stood there. They left eventually, with the kind of slow lingering looks people give you when they still think you might call them back. I locked every door, every window, and started the paperwork for the restraining order that same night. Having video of them refusing to leave after being asked repeatedly made the whole process move fast. It's been close to a year since the order went through. None of them have contacted me since, not my mother, not my father. Not Hazel, not Dean, not Elaine. I built a life out here on the West Coast that doesn't have room for people who think loyalty is something you owe by blood, instead of something you earn by showing up. Best decision I ever made.